Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Deuteronomy 16:20.
Please be seated. Let me introduce to you now the members of the Judicial and Bar Council who are present in this morning's public panel interview. We have with us the Honorable Congresswoman Jerville R. Luistro, ex-officio member representing the Legislative Department. She is the chairperson of the Committee on Justice in the House of Representatives. Honorable Justice Jose Catral Mendoza, JBC Executive Committee Chairperson and regular member representing the retired justices of the Supreme Court. Honorable Attorney Nesauro H. Firme, regular member representing the Academe. Honorable Justice Erlinda Piñera Uy, regular member representing the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. And Honorable Attorney Jose V. Mejia, regular member representing the private sector. May I now refer you to the Honorable Congresswoman Luistro to officially open today's public panel interview.
Good morning, everyone. The public panel interview of applicants for the position of the Ombudsman is hereby declared open.
Your Honors, the candidates to be interviewed this morning are Honorable Secretary of Justice Jesus Crispin C. Remulla and PCSO Chairperson Retired Judge Felix P. Reyes. May we request the candidates to please stand up and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this public panel interview of the JBC? So help you God. May we request Secretary Remulla to please proceed to your designated seat in the middle, and for Judge Reyes to please proceed first to the holding area. Thank you, Judge. Your Honors, the first candidate to be interviewed this morning is the Honorable Secretary of Justice Jesus Crispin C. Remulla. The first to interview Secretary Remulla is the Honorable Attorney Jose V. Mejia.
Thank you, Attorney Cuevas. Good morning, Secretary Remulla.
Good morning, sir.
I understand you were asked in advance to submit your actions and plans should you be appointed as Ombudsman. No? Can you please give us the highlights of those action plans that you have submitted?
Well, the most important probably is immediate. There's the immediate plans and there's the long-term plans. Well, the plans would really depend on how we view the position. And one thing that I intend to do is to do away with the Ombudsman as the office of the Ombudsman used as a weapon against people. I think that too much politics goes on in the office of the Ombudsman. Too many cases filed in partisan politics, which some meritorious and some may not be meritorious. And I think that we have to do away with many of these that are really meant there to harass people. So the weaponization of the position should not happen and should not be countenanced. Number two, well, we have to have a system to get rid of the backlogs that are pending there, because many people cannot get a clearance for some reason, and some cases are pending for the past 3 years. And I think it's unfair for people to be left holding the bag for something that is maybe a problem with efficiency. And well, as far as the investigations are concerned, then we have to go all out on the investigating many of these, or all those who may have violated the law, investigated motu proprio, or on complaint of other people. I think that we just have to hit the road running. That's what we have to do here, because if you think about it, the deadline is always yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Secretary, in a recent Philippine Star news article, it was reported that a particular advocacy group wants an ombudsman who is competent, fiercely independent, with unquestionable integrity. Do you think you fit these attributes?
I do. I think that my independence, my track record will speak for itself. For the past 38 years as a lawyer, 37 years as a lawyer, as a legislator, as a staffer, assistant secretary at the PMS, as a governor of Cavite. I think that I have been fiercely independent with my decisions, and always keeping in regard the legal principles and the interests of the people.
Secretary, arguably, you're one of the most awaited applicants to be interviewed today, no? And I've been receiving text messages at tingin ko po parang hati yung comment nila sa inyo. Mayroong nag-text sa akin, sabi niya sana pa-consider si Secretary Remulla, sana lang ang pag-asa natin, no, upang magkaroon ng genuine fight against graft and corruption. Meron naman nagsasabi, mamumuliti ka lang, etc. Ito po ay streamline later, no, to the public, no. Can you please give your statement and convince the public that you are the best choice for this position?
I've been in politics, elective politics, since 2004, or probably December 2003, when I started campaigning. Although I was a provincial board member, I was appointed as a provincial board member when there was a vacancy in our district, and my father had a stroke. So I had to carry the cudgels for him, at least with the people in the capital. And you'll see that there and then, I refused to run in the 1995 elections because I had other things to do. I had my law practice. I had my investments to take care of at that time, and I had a growing family. I had 5 children already at that time, and that politics did not become the main preoccupation of my life. I ran for Congress in 2003 and was elected in 2004. Meaning to say, I filed my candidacy in 2003. And I stayed in Congress and only stayed in one committee for the 3 terms that I was there. I was in the Rules Committee. Although I became Deputy Speaker, which is technically still a part of the Rules Committee, during my 3rd term in office as Congressman. Politics has always been a part of life for us because my father was a governor and he was a politician, but he was an outstanding lawyer during his time. But it was not, politics did not become the be-all and end-all of my life. Before politics, I dabbled in so many other things that I think would be significant in the way I am now right now. I was formed as a person not because of politics, but politics became me later on. I became involved in politics, and as usual, I'm very passionate with what I do. So it should not be a worry because politics is temporary. All these political ties are temporary. The more important thing, I believe, is national interest. And it is in the interest of the Filipino people that somebody with a vision, leadership, and courage go on and take this job so that we can settle many matters in our country and put it in the proper direction.
Thank you. That was my final question, Secretary, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Cuevas.
Thank you, Attorney Mejia. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Justice Erlinda Pinera Uy.
Thank you, Attorney Cuevas. Good morning, Secretary Remulla.
Good morning, ma'am.
As the current Secretary of Justice, what inspired you to pursue the role of Ombudsman at this point of your career? And how does this transition contribute to your vision for public service?
I think that the impunity of corruption in our system now is an emergency situation already, and it really needs a leader to put everything together for the country. And it is only through the office of the Ombudsman, designed by the framers of the Constitution, that graft and corruption can be curtailed and even prevented which is the better part of the job. Prevention is probably a better medicine for our system than the cure of having to put people in jail. But just the same, we will have to prosecute people to show the example that no deed will go unpunished. And the most important part of it would be being able to gather the proper evidence to support the case. Without any evidence, any case will rise and fall. With evidence, a case will prosper. So that's the most important part of it.
How do you define moral courage in public office? And if appointed, how would you best demonstrate your moral courage and independence from political influence?
I think that my experience in politics and my experience in public service would show that I've had and I have the moral courage to do what is right. Probably the number one is I'm the eldest son of my father, and I found the moral courage not to run for office in 1995, and I only ran for office in 2004. I think that this fierce independence from even my father defined my character. And when I was appointed as Assistant Secretary of the PMS, I became an assistant to the President, President Estrada then. And when he was being removed from office, I wrote his last letter based on the Constitution, Article 7, Section 11, giving a leave of absence so that he would step down for a moment so that the Vice President can be the acting President. Of course, there is this history. The Supreme Court ruled that there was a concept called constructive resignation, something which, of course, is reprehensible in labor law and all other laws that we have. So there, I really fought for that principle through and through. And later on, in the impeachment of Justice Corona, I was a deputy speaker. I was supposed to carry the line of Malacanang, the way that Congress runs. I still stood against the impeachment of Justice Corona. I believe that he was being persecuted and that there was a fishing expedition out there and that there was really no due process but a political kangaroo court that really tried and convicted Mr. Corona. So I stood up against I stood against the tide, so to speak, when things had to go that way.
What role should the Ombudsman play in ensuring compliance with procurement laws and preventing ghost projects or anomalous transactions?
Well, as I said earlier, prevention is actually the what we need to do when the Office of the Ombudsman becomes an actual active office again. And the role that the Ombudsman will play here is actually to go around the country or to gather people, put them into a seminar, and tell them to study these rules properly, and, of course, open the lines to the public so that we can be apprised of what's happening. There's nothing like a concerned public telling the Ombudsman that there's something going wrong, something going on, which is wrong from the very start in the procurement process. And I think that would be a good way to start, is to open that line to the public.
So that was my last question. Good luck to you, Secretary Remulla.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Justice Uy. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Congresswoman Jervil Luistro.
Good morning, Secretary.
Good morning, ma'am.
You've been a prominent political figure in Cavite, I believe for around 3 decades, as SB member, as governor, and ultimately as member of the House of Representatives representing your district. In 2022, you accepted the appointment as Secretary of Justice under the current administration. So, can you walk us through, Secretary, about your transition from being an elective official to appointive official?
It was an honor to be offered the position of Secretary of Justice. Something I didn't expect. I was expecting to become the majority leader of the House of Representatives. But because of this offer, I thought that probably it's probably the pinnacle, or one of the pinnacles of a lawyer's career, that he becomes a Secretary of Justice. And I accepted the position, and I accepted it as a challenge for reform. That's why I think that the JBC would be familiar with the reforms that we have instituted in the Department of Justice, and it's been a very fulfilling experience so far. Very challenging still because of the circumstances surrounding many of the controversies that we have to face as a Department of Justice.
For my second question, in 2022, the 7th District of Cavite was left without a congressional representative due to your appointment. Until, of course, Congressman Ping Remulla was elected in 2023. The question, Secretary, is, if appointed as Ombudsman, you would once again be leaving an office, this time the Department of Justice. So, what assurance can you give to the Filipino people that this time, as Ombudsman, you would see your mandate through and not relinquish it prematurely?
I actually wasn't thinking of being Ombudsman when I accepted the post of Secretary of Justice. I wanted to stay for the whole 6 years. But when I saw what was happening to our country, I saw the impunity of corruption. I thought that it might be the highest form of public service to offer myself as available for the position. Of course, it will depend on many factors, if I will be appointed or not. But I believe that staying the course is most important, especially in the job of the Ombudsman. And I think that the design of the Office of the Ombudsman has already shown that one cannot run for public office anymore. One who accepts the office of the Ombudsman does so with the collatilla that there will be no more politics after, especially at the age that I'll be retiring if I'm accepted or appointed to the post of Ombudsman. I'll be retiring. The term will be over at the age of 71, turning 72. I think by that time, I would have reached the peak of my prowess physically and intellectually. And we don't really know if we will be on the decline already. But I think that the best years are here ahead of us, and that this problem has to be solved. I will provide, I believe, the leadership needed to curb corruption, to stop corruption in our country.
So does that mean that you will be finishing your tenure in the Ombudsman if given the chance to be appointed as such?
I hope so. I hope so. God willing, I'll be staying there. Yes.
For my next question, Secretary, of course, you are the proponent and the author of Circular number 15 and number 28. This is the rule which mandated for an increased amount of evidence from probable cause to reasonable certainty of conviction standard. The question, Secretary, is if appointed as Ombudsman, would you adopt the same standard of evidence in the prosecution in the office of the Ombudsman?
I believe so. Maybe even a higher form. But prima facie would be a reasonable amount of evidence to be able to file a case. Because many of the cases decided by the Ombudsman seem to be always dismissed. Many of the decided cases of the Ombudsman, especially dismissal of government ranking government officials, are usually reversed by the Court of Appeals. So we have to study the cases filed and why this happens. I believe that the higher iota of evidence will help make these decisions stronger and more final. And have an imprint on people that the ombudsman means business.
For the next question, Secretary, under the 2022 rules of the Ombudsman, I'm sure you are aware of this. The committee reports from Congress should be subjected to case build-up, and the same should be considered non-adversarial and should not be docketed yet. However, that rule has been changed. In 2025, they provided for a rule that once received, the same should be docketed and subjected to preliminary investigation right away. If given the chance to be the next ombudsman, which rule are you going to adopt?
I think that immediately docketing a report would not be advantageous to the office of the ombudsman. I believe that the flexibility is needed to be able to do a case build-up. And that, because in my experience, I have received some committee reports or partial committee reports from Congress. And then they asked me, have you filed the case? But the committee report did not contain the evidence needed. So we still have to do a case build-up. I mean, it puts you on the right track on where to investigate, but it does not provide the necessary evidence. So how can you treat it immediately as a docketed case? I think that it's more important that we do a case build-up first before docketing a case.
Similarly, Secretary, the Commission on Audit is transmitting their decision to the Ombudsman. But it is not clear as well under the rules of the Ombudsman whether the same should be treated for purposes of preliminary investigation right away or otherwise. What is your opinion with respect to the appreciation that the Ombudsman should be giving to the decision of the Commission on Audit?
There should immediately be a case conference between the COA and the Office of the Ombudsman to determine if the acts or if the disallowances contained in any COA report is actionable or not. I think that's most important. If there is a case conference to clear the issues that have been raised in the COA report, I think that it will go a longer way. That single meeting will go a long way in determining whether a case is actionable or not.
By case conference, Secretary, does that mean that you will be subjecting the same to a case build-up before the same can be considered for preliminary investigation?
Definitely, because we will have to prosecute it in court. We will have to present the evidence. If we do not believe in our evidence, how can we pursue it relentlessly, tirelessly, and passionately? I think that having a very dreary way of presenting evidence is not the way to win a case.
And given the very challenging task and mandate to the Office of the Ombudsman, I wish to ask, Secretary, would you advocate for a power to issue subpoena of bank records for Ombudsman?
I believe that power exists already. I mean, the power to get bank records exists already with the Office of the Ombudsman.
Nonetheless, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, there is a Supreme Court decision which says that the same is still subject to the court order. So, in my interpretation, it went back to the original jurisprudence that it has to be a court order which will allow us to look into the bank records given the stringent requirement of the bank secrecy law. If you will be given the chance to propose a legislative measure, would you want that the Ombudsman be given the power to subpoena bank records without necessarily securing for a court order?
I would advocate that. I don't think that filtering the move to the judiciary is an assurance that the case will go properly. I think that the immediacy of the action is what is needed here, so that the momentum in building up a case will not be lost by having to go through a court process which can take forever sometimes. Not always, but sometimes.
That will be a stern warning for the erring public officials. And for my last question, Secretary, it is also tedious to secure a freeze order, which is being initiated by AMLA. I believe this is with the Court of Appeals. Would you advocate as well that the Ombudsman be given its own power to issue freeze order?
I wouldn't do that. What I would do is, if it's a property, I would annotate it in the title. If it's money, I would give notice to the bank that that account is under investigation, and then go to the court for an actual freeze order. I think that draws the line already, because that's already going into the control process of a property or monies that are in question. So I think that a court order would suffice in that case, or would be needed in that case.
Last question, Secretary. Of course, all the applicants are qualified. As a matter of fact, the JBC is tasked to select and nominate the best qualified to the position of the Ombudsman. Ano pong meron kayo na wala ang ibang applicants?
I haven't gone into the credentials of my co-applicants. But what I have is leadership. I think that I have been a leader for most of my life. I have gotten things done. I have a transformative type of leadership that I want to use for this office. And that's the first, I think. That's the most important attribute that will set me apart from the others.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good luck on your application.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luistro. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Attorney Nesauro H. Firme.
Thank you, Attorney Marfe. Good afternoon, Secretary. Sorry, good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
Yeah. I used to... May hangover pa ako nung kahapon. I have two sets of questions, Secretary. One comes from the good Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. And he would like to know your stand on the lifestyle check. As you understand, it has been in the news recently. So what is your stand on that?
I advocated that 24 years ago when I was working with President Erap, after he was removed from office. And it was one of the issues. The issue of corruption was then very hot when President Erap was removed from office or taken away from office. And I advocated the lifestyle check. And it became a conversation piece, at least for that time. But of course, I did not have the office to be able to enforce it. I was then a chief of staff in the Senate. I was chief of staff of Senator Luisa Ejercito Estrada.
So thank you, Secretary. I'll be asking my own questions. Number one, so if appointed as the Ombudsman, what can the stakeholders expect from you?
Well, a lot of action. I think that we will be incessant in our effort to curb corruption. I think that the presence of the Ombudsman will be felt everywhere. We will do what it takes to be able to solve this problem that the country is facing right now. I think that from the barangay level up, it's just a wave of corruption hitting this country right now. And I think that it is possible to really do something about it. And I go to work every day. I like work. I like working, and I'm always passionate about what I do. So expect a lot of passion in this job.
So some of the questions, by the way, I'm reading the questions to all applicants, no? To be fair to everyone. But some of the questions here have been covered, so I'll go to the next one. So I noticed, and sifting through your records, you've been in politics, you've been an elected government official. Your children are also elected now, no, as Congresswoman and Vice Governor, correct? Or Governor?
My youngest son is the governor right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I have another son who's a congressman.
Yes.
And another daughter who is the vice mayor in my mother's hometown.
Okay. So now my question now would be, And how apolitical are you? Are you a political or apolitical individual person?
I think that I'm looked upon as a leader more than a politician. I think that's what I provide to the province. I am the most senior among the politicians in our province. And that's why I think that I provide the leadership and the direction of many of our people there. And I can always walk away from politics the way I've done before. When I was expected to take the cudgels for my father in 1995 to run for office, I refused to run for office because it is not the right time and it's not the right thing to do. And I think that I've stood by that principle that politics can take seconds, a back seat to the more urgent things that we have to do.
Thank you. As we know, you have relatives in the government, and independence is one of the qualities of a good ombudsman. So, how would you display your independence should you become the next ombudsman?
I've always been a maverick of sorts in many ways. When I was in Congress, I moved around alone. I stood by my job. That's what I have to do is what I did. And I've been fiercely independent about the life I've been living, even here in the DOJ. The influence peddlers have stayed away from us because of this. We have not allowed people to come in and then try to tell us to decide cases in their behalf. I think that speaks for itself. I think that there has been no noise whatsoever about how we conduct ourselves in the DOJ. And as for my whole record as a public servant, I think that's open. I think people know how I've been, even in the House, in Congress, even as governor of Cavite. People have seen how independent I've been in doing things that had to be done.
Thank you, Secretary. Another quality of a good ombudsman would be integrity. So my question now is, can you tell us an instance where your integrity was put to test and how did you navigate through that?
In Congress, there was a time where it became the go-to thing to do was to put your PDAF into a foundation. I refused to do that. I stuck to the scholarships and to medical assistance because it was the right thing to do. And what this amounts to is really trying to control the money that does not belong to you. So we're better off doing it the right way. I think that was a big temptation that caused the conviction and prosecution of many congressmen. And 2 of them were convicted within our ranks. And that shows that it doesn't work for me. These enticements do not work for me. I do not want to dirty my hands with such things.
Next question, Secretary. How much value do you give to public perception?
In the age of trolls, in the age of social media, public perception can be created by troll farms and by people who have nothing better to do. It's important because it's a feedback mechanism. But we cannot be totally immune to it. We have to get that feedback properly so that we do the right thing. I think that in the end, it should be constructive for us and not disturb us. But I will not stake my life in social media. I will not debate with anybody in social media because nobody wins a debate there.
And I understand as a public servant, you do good and you get criticism still. So how do you handle public criticism, Secretary? Any tip?
Well, I think that I'm busy enough as it is. to be able to accomplish the things that I have to do. And that if I just start answering these criticisms and just reading all of them, I will lose all the time in the world. I don't think that it's right for people like me to trifle with it, because there's a job to do, always, a bigger job to do.
So let us assume, Secretary, you are now the Ombudsman. You have been appointed. And it's already 2029. In other words, tumawid na tayo to the next administration. So I have 5 things here in mind, and I want you to rank them accordingly. One being the most significant as far as you are concerned. Number 5 would be the least significant, not necessarily immaterial or irrelevant. So number 1 would be the President that appointed you to this post. Number 2 would be the sitting President, so the next President, that is. Number 3, the public, including, of course, their perception. Number 4 would be the safety of your family. And number 5, your personal goal, your vision and mission to the office.
I think that there must be one more number there. That's the country. What we can do for the country. After the country, I think that we have to stand by the vision that we need to fulfill. The family is very important, in the sense that in the end, that's the only thing that we have left when we walk away from where we are. So it's why it's important also. The presidents come and go. The sitting president who appointed me, if I will be appointed, will be proud of me. I think that that's the more important thing, is that the president who appointed me will be proud of what I am doing and what I have done. And the sitting president, hopefully, will also appreciate what there is, what we've done for the country. So that's the order by which I will look at my life.
Sorry. Thank you. So I'm sure there will be a lot of persons who will be helping you to get this post. So question now is, would you have the courage, the guts and nerve to file cases against these persons who were instrumental in you getting this ombudsman post?
I think that is not cases are there because they have to be filed. And if the evidence is out in the open, it's already established. What stops us from doing the right thing? We will do what we have to do. I think that's the ultimate job of the ombudsman.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. So now you are the ombudsman. So what significant development in your life do you think that would make you decide to quit the post? Meaning to say you would not finish the 7-year term.
Maybe my health only. If my health will not be cooperative, but so far, I've been very healthy. I have weathered a lot of storms in terms of my physical well-being. But that's the only thing that can stop me. But otherwise, I want to stay put.
Thank you, and good luck, Secretary.
Thank you, Attorney Firme. Our last interviewer is the Honorable Justice Jose Catral Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Attorney Marife. Good morning, Secretary.
Good morning, sir.
I represent the retired justices of the Supreme Court, and some of them, of course, their questions through me, addressed to you. One question is, can you distinguish the right to remain silent from the right against self-incrimination?
That's a situation, that's what the situation would call for. I believe that a person who has been arrested should invoke the right to remain silent until he is able to get counsel. And the right to self-incrimination will be in other fora. I think that the right to remain silent would be custodial in nature, And the right against self-incrimination would be in the other fora.
In your view, it is the forum where you invoke one and the other.
Well, like the Senate hearings yesterday, or the House hearings, if they want to remain silent, I mean, you cannot force them. It's the right against self-incrimination. If they invoke it, people have to respect it. I think that our legal system has provided for them.
Okay. Does the Office of the Ombudsman have legal standing to intervene on appeal in administrative cases resolved by it?
On appeal, Your Honor? On appeal with the Court of Appeals, let's say?
Yes. On appeal in administrative cases.
Well, it should have standing. It should be given standing. I think that the review of the actions of the ombudsman in court will entail its participation.
Okay. Can the doctrine of condonation be applied motu proprio by the Office of the Ombudsman?
To be able to forgive a wrong as it is, I think is something that would be very, very controversial. That can only be done if a person is to become a state witness or a whistleblower. Then we can condone what they have done in the past. But as a power itself, I think only the courts should be doing that.
Okay. Is the final and unappealable decision of the Office of the Ombudsman still be the subject of a judicial review?
Of course. Everything is subject to judicial review, I believe.
Okay. I think no more. Executive Order number 226 institutionalized the doctrine of command responsibility. What are the elements for one to be liable under said doctrine? What elements should be proved? That will be the last question from my colleagues.
The authority, power and authority.
Yes.
Number one is an element that's needed, a command. That power and authority is used for a decision by the people under the said authority, and that the authority would have to stand by the actions of those under him.
Well, there are three actually. You name one. What are the other two?
An questionable action or action committed by underlings that may have been questioned later on.
Yes. What are the nature of those actions?
The carrying out of executive actions. I think that these are ministerial actions, or actions that are part or parcel of the job being done by the person, or by the outfit involved.
How about the superior?
Well, the superior, in allowing such actions to happen,
Yeah.
should be responsible for what has been done and what is being done.
Yes. And the last one is that he must not have direct participation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
In your program here, you already covered this. You said you're going to raise the probable cause standard to prima facie evidence. That is your circular, SOJ circular. But in the category, improve the clearance system, you wrote, requirements will be streamlined so only complaints with sufficient prima facie basis can hold up issuance. Can you explain that in the light of your earlier position or what you have been advocating, raising the probable cause standard to prima facie evidence with reasonable certainty of conviction?
Well, in the clearance system, sometimes it becomes a headache for many people who are applying for positions when they have been with cases pending which have aged considerably and which have been pending for the longest time. And I think that the standard has to be raised as to why we keep cases alive. If the case does not contain any evidence, it's a cold case, we can dismiss it for subject to refiling without prejudice. But I think that we cannot hold people to account for something when the office is not doing anything to resolve the controversy.
Who will make such determination in the office of the Ombudsman?
I think the fact-finding will have to do it. The people who
It will also take time.
well,
Because you,
it's just a yes or no question. We can actually dismiss a case without prejudice of refiling, because that is the only way to do it. If it is weaponized as such, then it's unfair. I don't think that it should be weaponized. I don't think that the office of the Ombudsman should be weaponized.
okay. Secretary, are you impulsive?
No, sir.
No. In your line of work before, as a legislator, as a secretary, have you experienced stress or pressure? And how did you handle them?
Stress and pressure are always part of the job, I believe. As a legislator, during the corona hearings, there was a lot of pressure on us to follow Malacanang. But I refused. I just had to take it on the chin, if whatever they wanted to happen. So I stood by my commitment and my belief that the process was being used to vilify a person without any due process, because what was filed against him did not contain many of the fishing expedition matters that became part of the evidence. I think that should never happen.
Secretary, can you cite an instance in your career when you made an unpopular decision because it was right and lawful? It was the right and lawful thing to do. And how did you handle the consequences?
My career as a SOJ, as a Secretary of Justice, or my whole career in itself?
The whole career. Just an instance when you made an unpopular decision.
Well, as governor, I had to fire people who were there for the longest time, but I just had to do it. It's very unpopular. I mean, for the old timers in the capital, they frowned upon my action, but I think I was proven right.
How will you protect the office of the Ombudsman from becoming a tool for political harassment?
As I said in the opening questions,
Yes,
we cannot allow the office of the Ombudsman to be weaponized by anybody. It should not be a tool for political battles, but people who want to really file a case should produce the evidence needed and should assist the Ombudsman in coming up with the evidence. And if there's no evidence, then we have to dismiss these cases.
See. Secretary, what is emotional quotient, if you know? What is your understanding? Ganun na lang.
Emotional quotient is EQ, what they call EQ, is a trait of a person who knows how to, in dealing with his peers and fellow man. I think that the sensitivity is very important in how we treat our peers and our fellow men. And that's the emotional quotient that is required from many of us in the jobs that we do, and probably most demanded from a politician.
Do you possess such quality?
I would believe so, sir.
Thank you. I think that will be all, Secretary. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Your excuse.
Thank you, Justice Mendoza, and thank you, Secretary Remulla.
Dito lahat ako po. Doon wala.
I can do all things through Christ which strengthened me. Philippians 4:13. This verse emphasizes faith, perseverance, and reliance on God's strength in all aspects of life, including challenges in law, justice, and moral decision-making. It serves as a reminder that with Christ's guidance, we can overcome obstacles, pursue righteousness, and uphold justice with integrity. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more educational content. See you in the next video.